All right. Good morning. I'd like to call the regularly scheduled Planning Commission for June. We're in June now, right? Right? Isn't that right? June 14th, 2018 to order. If you would, please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Ms. Tusing.
They are. They're cheap too.
Are there any changes to the agenda?
Good morning, Commissioners. Yes, there are we only have 2 agenda items. There are changes to both agenda items. Land Development Code Text Amendment 1801, Ordinance 1818, which is a Land Development Code text amendment submitted by Ecoplexus for alternative energy generation facilities, and there's a revised motion and strike through and underline. What it does is just say that the text amendment cannot be effective until the comprehensive plan is. Even though the board acted on it, there's a 30-day waiting period. So just want to make that clear. And then the other changes to the agenda are for item number 4, PDI 1733P, SRQ Tech Park Expansion, which is a quasi-judicial, and that is changes to the staff report, just clarifying some square footages that were not accurate, and recommending in a recommended motion and strike through underline format as well. Again, it's tied to another item that needs to be approved prior to this being approved.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, Ms. Shank, is there anything from the County Attorney's Office?
No changes, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. All right, we'll move to item number 1, which is the minutes for May 10th, 2018, the Planning Commission meeting. Is there any revisions, clarifications, comments regarding the minutes? Okay, seeing none, the chair will entertain a motion.
Mr. Chair, I'll make the motion to approve the minutes.
Thank you. I have a motion by Mr. Ron. Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. DeLesline, second. Any discussion? Seeing none, the chair will call the matter to vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Chair votes aye. Motion passes 6-0. Thank you. All right, the next item we have on the agenda is citizen comments. This is an opportunity for anybody in the audience to come forward and make a statement regarding things that are not on today's agenda. There'll be a time later in the hearing to speak on the things that are on today's agenda. But is there anybody who wishes to come forward and again speak on something not on today's agenda? Okay, seeing no one come forward, we're going to move on. Excuse me, to the next item. These are presentations that are scheduled. So the first item we have is item number 3. Ms. Tusing, can you please read item number 3 into the record?
Yes, sir. Item number 3 is LDC Text Amendment 1801, Ordinance 1818. Land Development Code Text Amendment, Ecoplexus, Inc., Alternative Energy Generation Facilities. It is a legislative matter. These are amendments to the Manatee County Land Development Code, amending Chapter 2 definitions to provide definitions for alternative energy generation facilities, low-temperature solar thermal power, photovoltaic solar power, solar array, and solar fields, and to amend the definitions for utility use and utility use heavy. Amending Chapter 4 zoning by adding alternative energy generation facility as a use in specified zoning districts in Section 401.2, Schedule of Uses, Table 4.1, uses in agriculture and residential districts, Table 4.2, uses in non-residential districts, and Section 402.5, Schedule of Uses for Plan Development Districts, Table 4-9, Schedule of Uses for Plan Development Districts, and amending Chapter 5, Part 4, Standards for Accessory and Specific Uses and Structures, Section 531.54, Utility Uses to provide standards for alternative energy generation facility and to do some cleanup in the existing language. This is in relationship to the companion plan amendment that was just approved by the board on June 7th. And the additional hearing dates for this text amendment will be August 2nd and August 23rd in front of the board if you recommend approval for transmitting today. Thank you.
Thank you. And again, this is legislative, so you don't have to be sworn to speak on this matter. So, Ms. Tusing, is there an introduction from staff, or are we going to defer to the applicant?
I could do a brief introduction, but the written word kind of, the title pretty much said it, and the applicant does have representatives. And this is, I did want to point out, it is also a privately initiated text amendment.
Right. Thank you.
Can I ask one question, Ms.
Mr.
Tucson?
Rutledge.
Yes.
So the other changes in here for other utilities components are just structural. They're not a attempt to do anything other with those, like water and sewer and all the other things that were moved through the text to different spots.
No, sir, we were just trying to clean up. Before, it was kind of unclear what was considered a heavy utility use.
Gotcha.
They were kind of grouped together, so we're trying to differentiate between those two things. And as you can see in the use tables, you have utility use, and then you have utility use heavy. So there are different areas that they fall under and what zoning districts they can be in.
So there's no changes related to water treatment plants, major maintenance facilities, all that stuff?
No.
This is just recategorizing them so they're kind of collective as something heavy versus...
Yes, and I verified with our utility department to make sure that I was classifying each of those uses as they should be.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, ma'am.
Hannah Acevedo with the clerk's office. I just wanted to clarify that the motion will be to recommend adoption of not transmittal.
Yes, thank you.
Just wanted to clarify.
Thank you. I did not. If the applicant would please come forward and introduce your application here.
Good morning. My name is Josh Philpott with Stantec. I'm here on behalf of the applicant, Ecoplexus. We have a representative from Ecoplexus here today in the case that there's any questions regarding the operation and kind of the technical details of solar facility. This is the second time we've been here. Previously, we were here for a comp plan amendment that was to the first step in amending the regulation to allow for solar facilities in agricultural areas and certain industrial areas. Today, we're here to talk about the Land Development Code amendments. Excuse me. Oh, mouse wasn't on. So the current requirements require that are classified solar facilities as power generating facilities similar to a coal or oil or gas fired facility. We're here today to talk about the Land Development Code amendments to allow for a more of an expedited review for a solar facility that's less intensive than those uses. Again, solar is passive. Outside of the initial install, it creates no disruption, no noise, no noise, light, smoke, some of the compatibility issues that come from other power generating facilities. So we see the future of solar, the future of power being more localized, more environmentally friendly, more going to the solar than the power, the traditional power facilities. So again, the first step was the comp plan amendment to allow for solar facilities to be permitted in ag. The agricultural future land use classification, that was approved last week. Now we're doing the Land Development Code amendments, and there's a few highlights to that. The current requirements are that any power generation facility requires a plan development. We're requesting to allow for those uses to be located in agricultural facilities. And one of the important things here is to deal with the compatibility concerns. So when you're adding it into an agricultural area that might be adjacent to or nearby a few residential homes, or the view of that from a main road, to address the compatibility concerns. So we've done that with this. But again, creating definitions for higher intensity utility uses, the wastewater treatment facilities, the water treatment facilities, the power generating traditional power plants, and then allowing for minor utilities to be located in a less intensive process. Also, the compatibility, the adjacent buffering, and I have the proposed language. I think everybody has a copy of that. I won't go through it in detail, but I think one of the highlights here is to look at the permitted uses table. We've added alternative energy generation facilities as a permitted use in the A category. And what's important here is the alternative energy generation versus the heavy use or heavy utility use. What you'll see is for alternative energy generation, it's permitted in A, but heavy utility is not, which would still require those heavier utility uses to go through the plan development process to address the compatibility concerns. In that permitted category, it's important to address the landscaping and the screening, and we've included buffering requirements along and additional setback requirements. So from any residential property, the setback is going to be 50 feet, along with a landscape buffer with trees and shrubs to deal with that, as well as landscaping along the right-of-way. So that's really the highlights. I mean, if there's specific questions regarding the language, we can go through those. But I think that kind of addresses the intent. And the other thing is just to clarify that the related facilities for solar are as part of this as well. So not just the solar panels themselves, but a substation. And now as battery is coming online, becoming more, I guess, financially feasible to flatten the curve of where you store the power during peak daylight times and kind of disperse that power as the sun goes down. So.
Okay, thank you. Are there any, Mr. Rutledge?
So I have a couple of questions, and forgive me for not being too smart about some of this, but does your proposal intend to include things like other than solar, like wind turbines?
No, sir.
Okay, so this is strictly for solar and the kind of solar development that we see in typical panels, films, all those things they use?
Yes, sir.
And can you say that this will not have any impact on soil, water, air, or animals when they install these? After they are installed, I understand there's some disruption or whatever, but once they're in, do they emit things that will impact the soil, water, air, or the animals?
Generally, no. No, not.
Generally is a bad term, I think.
So the short answer is, it would be, the short answer is no. These are passive. Once they're installed, they install a ground rack, so a foundation of a rack on one end, and then there's no, it doesn't generate noise, it doesn't generate smoke, it doesn't generate, there's no disruption to environment outside of the initial install, and the initial install is very low impact as well.
And so, for example, one of the things that I think about is that we convert all this agricultural into developed lands, and the interesting thing would be whether these would become some forms of sanctuaries for animals, birds, and stuff like that, because there is basically green everything else around it, right?
Right.
It's
yes,
not
I mean,
like, it's not a paved
and
surface, right?
No, absolutely, and that's where I was going to go. I guess below the solar arrays themselves, it's still grassed. It's still and whether that's some sort of wildflower or there's different alternatives to address that.
There's seeding and stuff like that they can do, right?
Yes.
So what's bad about this?
That's a good question.
Can't think of anything bad about it? I'm just kidding. You may not know me, but.
Any additional questions for the applicant? I have one question. What's the typical height on the arrays?
So the typical height, as a panel is flat, is somewhere in the 4-foot range. As the panels rotate, and this depends on the technology of each install. Everyone's different, but if it has a rotating, a tracking system that'll elevate it up, at highest, at the very peak, when the sun's at the lowest, you're looking at a 12 to 14 foot top of the panel,
right?
Very top of the panel.
Right. And you mentioned the facilities to flatten the curve, such as batteries. Do those are typically housed in a structure?
In really an equipment cabinet, more or less, yeah. And I don't know if I think that's probably the most appropriate answer that you're gonna.
So the facility, it would be a combination of the collector panels and cabinets, or are there going to be buildings also on the site?
No, there's no intention to have necessarily a building. At most, there may be, you know, some facilities install a little maintenance shed, but
Right. Okay.
no,
Okay.
there is no intent.
Mr. Rutledge?
And that kind of leads to the question, so anything that's constructed other than having the approval for the solar panels themselves, but a building would go and there would fall under our
Under the current
regular
regulations.
code, right? That's
Yes,
the
sir.
intent of this.
Correct.
Okay, so you're not trying to get out of the building code part of it, you're just trying to say, these aren't sewer plants.
Correct. Sewer, but yeah, exactly.
That, no offense to the sewer department,
Correct.
which everybody loves.
Okay. Mr. Rhodes?
What's the life expectancy for the panels, and is this going to be a continual renewal process where after so many years you don't say, okay, this has given us our economic return, we're moving on, and here's all the panels?
No, and rather than me take a stab at answering that, I'll ask Pete Parkinson to come and answer with the Ecoplexus.
Good morning.
Good morning, Pete Parkinson with Ecoplexus. The warranty on these is there's a slight degradation every year. So at 20 years, we're still producing 80% of the original power. So maybe in 25, 30 years, it might make sense to take those old panels off and put new ones on, but.
Is it more likely that technology changes will be more important than the 20-year ammo and those products? I mean,
What was that?
don't you think the change in products will change more than the decline of the equipment? You're going to replace them more readily because of the equipment. Like these thin panels they now put on the roofs and stuff like that to generate. And
They're, right now they're per watt is pretty expensive, so it'd have to make sense. I mean, and we're just not getting the efficiency gains out of them per year as we are, the degradation.
do you already have an agreement with the power companies to sell back this power?
Not yet. That's what we're working on.
Hasn't that been going on for like 20 years trying to get that done?
It's fun to work with them.
Your entertainment is not mine.
What is the current efficiency on the panels? Just information.
It ranges, it's in the 20s right now.
So, okay, all right. Any additional questions for the applicant? Mr.
So one
Rutledge?
more. So are you deemed a utility?
We'd be called an IPP, an independent power producer.
So would you be a utility? That's a good. I don't know what that means. That doesn't
Not as regulated by the
That's my point.
PUC. We are still regulated through the rules that the utility has to follow, right? But it goes through, the utilities are the only ones that have to deal with the PUC. So our approval to interconnect and for them to buy power still has to be approved.
So you're supervised by the Public Service Commission. It's kind of my question. Do you have to follow a set of guidelines that are consistently understood as the guidelines?
Yes.
Okay, gotcha.
Question.
Mr. Roth?
Are you leasing the land
Yes.
and you have a long-term lease with
Yes.
the owner?
Yeah.
And does the owner have any right to move or change your equipment?
No.
Okay. Anything else?
Would you want these next to your house?
I already have them on my house.
Good answer. That's a good answer. Okay.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much. Does staff have any additional information? Ms. Tucson, can you clarify, in our packet, we have red line and blue line, strike through and underline. Is there a difference between the two?
No, just changes made at different times.
Okay, all right, just wanted to make sure.
It was I was trying to utilize our existing 531 section, and as it changed, it sometimes didn't work out exactly right.
Okay.
Yes, I'm just going to go through a little bit of the things and how we structured the specific approval, or not specific approval, the 531 section, which is our specific use criteria. and to go over some of the things that were mentioned. The definitions that we're proposing are the same definitions that are contained in the comprehensive plan amendment that you recently approved. And I do want to point out that under the alternative energy generation facility, which it specifically states that it's for solar power, and that it also says that the facility may have other equipment that is directly involved in the storage and transmission of electricity. Needless to say, the powers, the panels soak it up, but there needs to be an inverter to transfer it to, the overhead lines. And then also with the increase in technology of batteries, you're not losing the energy that isn't utilized during the day. They can store it and use it at another time. So we want to make sure that is clear to everyone. And, I'm having conversations with the applicant. I want to make sure that the staff who has to review these will also understand that it's not just panels that would be located on the site. And any of the buildings that would be located, if they are structures, would have to meet the minimum setback requirements and standards of the building code and or the land development code. So that hasn't really changed. So the definitions, we utilize the same definitions, and under utility use, I attempted to define those that are what we consider light utility uses versus heavy. The heavy utility uses require the comprehensive plan category of public, semi-public 1, and a zoning of PDPI. You'll actually be seeing something come before you, a change to our Southwest wastewater treatment facility, which has a public, semi-public land use category and a PDPI zoning. So that's what we require for those types of facilities, and or like the Florida Power Generating Plant, out in Parrish. Then, as Josh mentioned, we're proposing uses in the agriculture zoning permitted use in A. In the industrial, it will be a permitted use in LM and HM. And then in the planned development zoning districts, it would be allowed in PDI, which is planned development industrial. If you happen to have PDPI zoning, you would also be allowed to do it. And then also the PDEZ zoning. And then we broke down section 53154, as I said earlier, to modify to incorporate the alternative energy, and then also doing some cleanup. So if you turn to item C, I tried to include the standards that would be applicable to all utility uses. Then we broke down into item number D is the rack-mounted alternative generation facility. Again, the standards that are required for that, for the rack, which is what the solar power is. So those standards apply to everyone. And I will point out that there is a maximum height of 15 feet. I know, Mr. Connolly, you asked about the maximum height, and that is the maximum height that is allowed. We then added the standards for if you're in A zoning, what do you have to do? And under A zoning, you're required to maintain a 50-foot setback if you're adjacent to residential, because there is a potential to have that. And it applies to both solar panels and any other above-ground structures. Roadway buffer, we've proposed a 10-foot minimum, and then the plantings are trees and shrubs. Then we also have requirements for if you're located within the industrial districts, which is either LM or HM in the standard zoning districts, or the PD districts. And again, they have requirements, and most of them are applicable to what the standards are within their district. And we tried to define screening so everybody know what this definition is and what screening requirements they would need to meet. I do want to point out one thing. Our definition for adjacent within the land development code requires you to, if you're across the street of a facility, that you are considered adjacent. For the purpose of these facilities, we're changing that if you're adjacent to a collector or an arterial, being across the street from a facility does not require, you're not considered adjacent. Because you look at where some of these uses would be, the uses that are around it are very similar in nature. So those are the highlights. And if you want to, I feel that we've made it hopefully clear so anyone reading it will know what we're trying to accomplish. So if you have any questions, I'm here to answer them.
Thank you. Any questions for staff? Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
I do want to say one thing. We did work with both, we drafted language. I mean, they presented us language. We drafted different language. Ecoplexus reviewed it, came back, negotiated, and Florida Power has also seen this language.
Can I just ask, that was my question. So this, in looking at the APA analysis, kind of, it looks like you addressed all the things they said were issues, right? The
Yes.
land buffers, building. Is there anything else we should do to entice the use of solar in our area? Because as I look at the map, it shows that, the Tampa metro area looks like one of the best places in Florida to be doing this. And so I was just curious, was there something that you thought maybe we should do more or think about more than what we're doing at this point? Or
I think that what we're doing now is making it a less cumbersome process. So hoping that that by doing that more people will come in, because you don't have to, there is no land designated PSP1. You have to get a comp plan amendment. You don't have PDPI zoning unless you are already one of those uses. So that's a burden, that's at least, 6, 8, 9 month process just to get your plan amendment and your zoning done. So this, by opening it up to standard zoning districts, I think we're giving the opportunity for people to look at it.
so kind of asking you, because we see you here a lot.
Is that a problem?
No, that's lovely. My point is that I would be very interested in seeing what other things in driving down and writing our new codes we could be more aggressive, because I've had some experience working with the major power companies, and one of the challenges is trying to get them to accept this. And I would love for us to be more proactive and say that people within our community can use these solar things as they choose. In other words, so maybe if there was a major land developer who said, I'm going to put up a field of this, and everybody within 1,000 feet or 10,000 feet or however you want to do it would have the ability and the obligation or the right or some kind of commitment to be able to use that without the power company saying they can't. So one of the things I'm always kind of curious about is how do we facilitate letting people do this more than not?
That is something I don't know the answer to. I know that a lot of this is regulated through the Public Service Commission, which we're not involved in. I mean, there's all kinds of rules that we do. So we're just trying to open up the field. This is not to, this does not address individual power sources, individual solar. That is covered, and we purposely didn't include that in here because that is something that is more building code related than it is land use related. So where your solar panels go on your roof is a matter of the direction that you face. So, and that's, and the building department issues permits to install those. I know that Mr. Gerstenberger has one in his house, and he actually sent me a zero energy bill. He showed me a copy of it. So, I mean, it can happen. Net zero. So, I mean, and because I was using him as a source to find out how do you deal with it as an individual person if you're wanting to do solar. And so, he gave me that information.
So just to clarify, the intent of this is to allow these alternative energy generation facilities within A zonings, and that's the only permitted zoning that it's allowed in.
No, agriculture zoning it's permitted, LM, HM, PDI, PDPI, and PDEZ.
Right, I was referring to the residential.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Section, yeah.
Yes, and agriculture A zoning is not really considered residential.
Right.
It's a agricultural zoning district.
It's allowed that, but if for instance, this is a alternative generation, energy generation facility, should somebody come in and want to do a mixed use or a residential, and they wanted to do something like set aside a portion of their property to augment the grid, they would go through probably a PD process where they would be.
We did not include it in the PDMU at this time. That might be something that we look at because we're trying, to have it to be part of an overall development plan. That might be something that's looked at, but I don't know how easily that that works for people because you still need to deal with the power company. Most of the time, I don't think in Florida, I'm not sure, the things I've read, it's a little bit different. I don't know if you can just hook up and go yourself.
Right.
No, you can't.
So that maybe that's something in the future that.
But
we're
I
gonna
think
have-
Right,
point
as
is well made. I think-
technology changes and as people start looking at this, I think the opportunities will be there to perhaps do it, but, there's there's lots of rules that they have to follow that we're just a small little portion of their approval process.
But I think the point is what I was trying to get at is that if we're approving PUDs and people ask for exceptions, I think one of the things I'd like to see is say if they set aside a portion, say this is our solar farm, and maybe just park your car there and gas, juice up, or maybe take and plug your phone in. I don't know, but my point is that we ought to be forward thinking and saying if people want exceptions, this is something we like. That we like things that are not polluting and not affecting soil, animals, water, all that stuff. So I would like you, because you are here often, as I mentioned, to think about that when you talk to people or when we're writing our code and people ask you about what should the code include. I think that should be on the forefront of our mind because that to me seems to be like a.
And when you talk about what would happen in a planned development district, say a mixed-use project, are you talking about actually having a solar field? Because these range usually between 400 and 600 acres.
Right, I think it's two different things. I think this is the initial foray into the land development code that addresses this. I think there needs to be additional investigation. Like, for instance, I've done projects in other municipalities, that apartment complex where they set aside a couple acres to do an array, but it's nothing to this scale. So
Right. I mean,
but I think
It is the concept of saying it's come far enough that it can be usable.
right. Maybe as the code progresses, if there's if an applicant's maybe thinking outside the box where they may want to do something like that, where maybe it's an option. But
well, and that is certainly more of a personal use. Like if you're setting aside a small portion of area, not hundreds of acres, because that's what these take.
I
Is
understand.
hundreds of acres. But for instance, in the apartment complex, as an example, that's more of a personal. That is specifically power for that user, not. You're not selling that power out to other people.
well, you could be.
Well, you could, but you're going to have more than a couple of acres to make that happen.
But to make an impact
Yeah.
outside of your community.
Right.
So, all right, I think we've beat that horse to death, so.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, I'd like to open the hearing up for public comment. So if there's anybody in the audience who wishes to come forward and speak on this matter, please do so. Anyone at all? Okay, seeing no one come forward, we're gonna move on to staff closing comments. Okay, applicant, there's really nothing to rebut, but if any closing comments? All right. Is there any deliberation, discussion, clarifications? Okay, the chair will entertain a motion.
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Rhodes.
I'll make a motion based upon the staff report, evidence presented, comments made at the public hearing, and finding the request to be consistent with the Manatee County Comprehensive Plan in accordance with Section 341 of the Land Development Code. I move to recommend adoption of Ordinance 18-18, amending the Manatee County Land Development Code as recommended by staff, subject to Ordinance 18-17 becoming effective.
Think we have a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Mr. Ron, second. Again, any discussion? Seeing none, the chair will call the matter to vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Chair votes aye. Motion passes 6-0. Thank you. Thank you. All right, we're going to move on to the next item, and this is a quasi-judicial item. So if anybody intends to speak on this matter, if you would please rise to be sworn in.
You swear or affirm that the factual statements and factual representations which you're about to present to the Planning Commission will be truthful and accurate? Thank you.
Thank you. Again, this is a quasi-judicial, which requires any disclosure of ex parte communications. Have any of the commissioners had any ex parte communications? Okay. Seeing none identified. All right. Ms. Tucson, can you please read item number 4 into the record?
Yes, sir. Item number 4, PDI 1733P, SRQ Tech Park Expansion. It's a quasi-judicial hearing. Dorothy Rainey is the planner and will be giving our presentation. This is amending ordinance PDI 1401ZP to approve a preliminary site plan for the addition of 54,529 square feet of light industrial warehouse space to an existing industrial park to amend stipulations, subject to amended stipulations as conditions of approval, located on an approximately 26.97 acre site in the IL Industrial Light Future Land Use category within the PDI Plan Development Industrial Zoning District, and it is located at the southeast corner of US 301 and Televast Road in Sarasota, Manatee County, Florida.
Thank you. Ms. Shank, I believe you had a clarification?
I have a few statements to say. Mr. Rutledge was asking me a question.
I wanted
first.
to disclose, although I have not had any discussions about this with this group, I do have some discussions going on with the Benderson Group for a tenant that I represent in a different industrial location they have. So I don't know if that's material, but I wanted to disclose that. Is that
Ms. Shank, does that affect this application?
Do you have any financial gain or loss as a result of this project?
No, ma'am.
No, I don't see any voting conflict.
Okay.
All right, thank you, sorry.
Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to point out to the Planning Commission that there is some pending litigation that has some relevancy to this case, does not involve this applicant or this project, but the county has been named defendant, and the Circuit Court in that case did issue a final judgment concerning conservation easements, which I have to discuss briefly.
Okay.
Since litigation is still pending and the county plans to appeal any adverse ruling, I'm not getting the details of that case, but generally speaking, it was a legal challenge to the validity of Section 706.8B as in boy of Land Development Code. And this section requires a conservation easement be provided by developers over existing wetlands and associated wetland buffers that developers do not impact as part of their development for enforcing the wetland preservation and buffering requirements of the Council Plan and LDC. In other words, if it's anywhere on your property, it automatically is imposed as a conservation easement a number of years ago, and even though you're not impacting it. And the rule should be, and I'll read the legal analysis, but the rule should be only if you're impacting wetland on your property, then if you have other wetland you're not impacting, you impose a conservation easement on that to mitigate the impacts that you have. It has to be in proportion to your impact. And in that case, as in this case, there was a condition of site plan approval that the county mandated the conveyance of a conservation easement over the wetlands and wetland buffer area to the county, even though there was no mitigation required for wetland impacts. So in this case, in your agenda packet, there's attachment 13, which is an email memo from staff stating that the conservation easement at issue in this case was not required by the county to serve as compensation for on-site wetland impacts from development, and the conservation easement was required by that same section, 706.8 B as in boy LDC. In the pending Circuit Court case, this same provision of the LDC was determined to violate the U.S. Constitution and the Florida Constitution by requiring exaction without consideration of the specific impacts of the development. So getting back to this case, the existing zoning ordinance, which is in your attachment 12, has stipulations D4, D5, and D6. And these stipulations, as a matter of law, have to be deleted. So procedurally, the applicant will go before the board at a future meeting to ask them to release the conservation easement. But because they're not shown in strikeout in your staff report, I'm just drawing them to your attention. And I'm going to read them for the record. D4 currently says, prior to first CO or certificate of completion, acceptance a conservation easement for the areas defined as post-development jurisdictional wetlands / wetland buffers shall be dedicated to the county in accordance with LDC 71982, which is now the 7068B, we just discussed. Stipulation D5 currently states, prior to first certificate of completion acceptance, wetland buffers shall be restored in accordance with the site plans and the Wetland Buffer Restoration Plan provided by DSA dated June 24, 2005. And the existing D6 states the developer shall provide signs adjacent to wetland buffers, conservation easements indicating that the area is a conservation area as shown on the approved plan. Signs should be installed prior to the first certificate of completion acceptance. So those D4, D5, and D6 are supposed to be deleted. That being said, today the applicant is requesting Plan Commission recommendation to approve a preliminary site plan that shows impacts to wetlands. The applicant still has the burden of proving the proposed preliminary site plan is consistent with the council plan and compliance with the LDC. You still review all your normal criteria, or the wetland impacts justified. But we can't stipulate that anything goes in a conservation easement. That's the point I'm trying to make, and I'm just trying to clarify that before we get into the details. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Rutledge.
A point of clarification. So our review of their submission today is in regards to the site plan approval and the wetlands. The obligation to then place the conservation easement on it is not really before us. Is that a true statement?
Well, in your recommended motion, in your update memo, you'll see revised recommended motion, notes the usual, recommended approval, PSP, et cetera, subject to release of conservation easement V18502. And what you're actually recommending is those stipulations be deleted.
So
It's not required, so I'm just saying that in the record in case a member of the public says
Right.
you shouldn't impact the wetlands because there's a conservation easement already on it.
Mhm.
You don't consider that. You consider the applicant has to prove up certain criteria to justify impacting wetlands. Are they viable, non-viable? And they'll present their case on that.
So the conservation easement that was previously placed on it was inappropriate or deemed to be inappropriate?
Well, it's analogous,
Yeah.
it's similar to a pending case we have, so we have to follow. Eventually, we'll amend our code if we lose the appeal, but we haven't filed an appeal yet. Everything's still pending in circuit court.
Okay.
can I ask my question again?
Mr. Rutledge.
So, again, our review of the site, its impact on the wetlands, its design, its appropriateness, that's under our review.
Correct.
Whether they ultimately decide for or against placing the jurisdictional wetlands and protected conditions on that is not really for us to review at this point. That is going to be adjudicated someplace else, correct?
Well, it's not adjudicated. There's no pending lawsuit on this case.
Well,
Basically, what I'm saying is, your recommendation is subject to the board. The board is the governing authority. Zoma has authority to release that conservation easement. It's a separate document recording the public records. So we made your recommendation subject to the board approving releasing the conservation easement. They were given the same legal advice you heard. To be consistent, I just wanted you to be fully informed.
yes, ma'am. I think I do understand.
Ms. Schenk, the
Here's what she's saying, we can do all of this, subject to.
recommended motion, the revised recommended motion does not include D7, is that correct?
Correct. There are environmental stipulations that I'm sure the applicant and staff will go over with you that concern an ecosystem management plan, and it'll be presented in the hearing.
Okay. All right. All right. Everybody got that straight? Hopefully, the hearing will actually add some clarity to that.
You think it's going to
Sorry
clear
about
it up?
All right. Okay, we've had the introduction. Have we read this into the record? I think we have. It's been so long ago, I forgot.
Too many questions.
Either that or
All
you're-
right. And so we'll go on to the applicant presentation or introduction. So who do we have for the applicant?
Thank you, Commissioners. My name is Todd Mathis, representing Benderson Development. I have been sworn. I'm joined by Clint Kuffel, our civil engineer, and Matt Miller, our environmental scientist, who will answer any questions that might come up as we go through our presentation. I'll get to the wetland issues at the end here, but let me just cover the basics of the project. We're located just north of University Parkway, east of 301, south of Televast Road, and west of, actually, a rail right-of-way, not 27th Street. It's 27th Street East, and then a rail line, and then us, and we're right next door to Evoqua Water. It's a 27-acre site, 26.97 acres. It's a light manufacturing zoning designation. We're proposing an addition of 54,000 and change square feet to the existing 358 that are there. We're requesting special approval of a change to the floor area ratio by just 1/100th to go from 0.35 to 0.36, and specific approval to reduce the required open space from 25% to 23%. And we're also requesting approval to impact a 3/4 acres of wetland in exchange for providing wetland mitigation credits from the Braden River Mitigation Bank. A little bit about the site history. This site was initially, development started in 2005 by a prior developer owner. They planned about 200,000 square feet of retail, gas, industrial, light manufacturing, and it was a motel use on the property, not the entire property. A successor developer, a partner, worked with that group in 2009, modified the PDI to add some acreage at the hard corner of Televast and 301. The project was called Washington Crossings. They were planning a gas station at that hard corner. In 2009, the project site construction started. You can see the building pads on the site. Some of the parking was installed. The internal road network was built, and the site was basically cleared and graded. Water, sewer, storm infrastructure was put in place, electric was put in place, site lighting was brought in, and the project failed. Why the project failed? It was a combination, I believe, of the failing economy and the reality that a gas station on the site is a regulatory difficulty because the site is located partially within the Televast plume area, so certain uses and work is restricted within that area, not as a result of any contamination that occurred on this property, but remnant contamination that leaked onto this property. So the property went into receivership or foreclosure, and in 2012, we purchased the property. We came in and modified the final site plan of the prior developer. We basically stayed within the certificate of level of service of the prior project, but modified the uses to straight light manufacturing and warehouse uses. We would call it flex space, and we started to build the site. Some of our first tenants were Berry Plastics and some others. Berry Plastics has a manufacturing facility just up the street and needed significant additional ancillary warehouse space to support their operations. We came back in 2014. We added a little bit of square footage to the site to finish out the project and build the building on the north. It's multi-tenant. It's dock high across the backs of all the buildings, with the exception of the southernmost 20,000-foot building. And we sort of moved on from this project. It was filled up. It's a real success. We're very proud of it. We purchased land up the street and built what we call SRQ Commerce Park North, immediately adjacent to Berry Plastics. We started this application in 2016, however, as a result in part of the wetland issues we'll discuss, but also because there was a demand for about 54,000 feet of space for a new employer to Manatee County. And given the facts and circumstances, we thought it would make the most sense to expand the Berry Plastics building, the building that's in the back of the site, basically in line. It will look like an addition, but it is physically its own building space. A little bit about the FAR and open space requests. Both obviously are very minor. We're talking about 1/100th of a change to the FAR and a 2% change to open space. We believe that really the context of this site supports that request. We're surrounded by light manufacturing uses. We're adjacent to a highway, to Televast Road, and to a railway right-of-way. You know, this open space and FAR change is literally imperceptible to the public. We don't adjoin any land uses that derive any benefit from those requirements. We're not adjacent to a residential neighborhood. We're not adjacent to any civic uses. We have heavy active uses around us and are requesting a very minor deviation to accommodate that tenant space demand. A little bit about the wetland history. In 2005, as I had mentioned, the prior developer had designed the site around this remnant wetland. It's a very small wetland. It's not a high-quality wetland. We can go back through the environmental reports and basically demonstrate to you that it was a isolated wetland, that it wasn't ditched. It just existed. Why the prior developer avoided that wetland, I can't say for sure, but I can tell you that the economics of working around something like that are a lot better than filling it when you're building warehouse space. And that developer started work They never removed exotic plants. They never planted the wetland. They never planted the buffer. They failed. We stepped in. We picked up the project. We wanted to keep a lot of existing infrastructure in place. And we did go through that effort of removing the exotics, planting the wetland, creating the buffer. And like I said, we had moved on from the site, and we're hoping it was a total success. It's outlined here in white on the right-hand side of the page. And as we were performing our required monitoring and maintenance, it's something you do after you plant a wetland. You monitor and maintain until it's successful and you can transfer it to operations. We determined that the wetland was failing. All of the plants we had planted were dying, all the trees were dying, and we started to investigate the cause of that in collaboration with both Manatee County environmental staff and SwiftMud. We determined that there was a tailwater condition. Water was basically backing up from the railway into the wetland, causing a constant inundation, so basically creating an open surface water body as opposed to a wetland, which is periodically wet and allows wetland plants to succeed. We resolved to fix it. So we went back in, we planted the wetland, we planted the trees, we removed the exotics, and we worked for about the next 6 months with SwiftMud in the county to attempt to resolve the downstream constriction. We contacted the railroad. We have a relationship with the railroad because we pay them a fee for a sewer line that goes underneath. And we worked with SwiftMud, we worked with the county, and we were very hopeful that we could just resolve this downstream constriction, make this wetland work, and move on. We had now invested twice in planting that wetland. That didn't work. The railroad was not amenable. Their transportation and logistics concerns prevailed, and it became apparent to SwiftMud that a change needed to happen to our permit. So basically what they suggested was that we raise the weir. This wetland serves both a stormwater and wetland function. We raise the weir. It would become a stormwater pond because it would be constantly inundated, but it would in fact prevent the tailwater condition from occurring and at least control the stormwater in an appropriate way. That to us didn't make a lot of sense. It wasn't the highest and best use of the land. It didn't result in the wetland benefits being realized that were anticipated with this project, and so we are proposing an alternative. We did an environmental report in support of our SwiftMud application, and an update to that post our second replanting of the wetland, and still determined and demonstrated the quality of the wetland was low. It was always low. It was always sort of a remnant isolated thing, but it was low. It was dominated by exotic invasives. It was providing minimal habitat, and that downstream constriction was effectively turning this wetland into a non-viable wetland, into an open surface water. Your county policies define non-viable as less than 0.4 UMAMs and less than a half an acre. We are less than 0.4 UMAMs. We're actually 0.3 UMAMs as originally designated or described by the Washington Crossings Project. It was a 3/4 acre wetland exceeding the 0.5, but again, this wetland has been regressing and retreating and diminishing in size over time. So in our minds, it certainly reached that level, and in SwiftMud's mind, it reached that level. Nevertheless, as I said, we chose to modify the SwiftMud permit and to come in and propose an alternative to the mitigation plan in connection with a development project that we believe achieves the policy 3.3.1 criteria at a much higher level, at a much more consistent level, and in a way that will forever be realized in Manatee County by purchasing Braden River Mitigation Bank credits. And I think as we look at each of these criteria, and we can go through them if you'd like, but the bottom line is that we have a failing system that was never a very good system, and we have the opportunity to do a lot more here. So as we go through the Manatee County policy, policy 3.3.1 provides that when mitigation is required by the state, the type and quantity of mitigation shall be determined using UMAM. We did, in fact, obtain a SwiftMud permit on the site in March of this year. That requires us to purchase 0.3 UMAM credits from the Braden River Mitigation Bank. We are actually proposing and have worked out with staff providing more than 0.3 UMAMs. We're going to provide excess mitigation to help cross that public benefit hurdle. Mr. Nabel might have more to say about that. But that's basically the sum and substance of the proposed wetland impacts. You know, we have a wetland that has failed twice. It will continue to fail, it will continue to recede, and it can't be fixed. And in order to remedy that, we're going to not just provide compensation for the wetland that should have been, we're going to provide a lot more. In summary, this is a PDI light manufacturing site. We're proposing some amended stipulations. We're bordered and surrounded by light manufacturing, heavy intensive industrial uses, including US 301, the rail line, Televast Road. We have very minor deviations to the FAR and open space, which in the context of the project, hopefully you'll agree that there's certainly no off-site impacts to the public, or loss to the overriding policy and intent intended to be achieved by those standards. And really what we view this as is Washington Crossings was a failed project that we picked up. The wetland turned into a failed project that we picked up, and we're turning the complete project into a success with your assistance. This project's been a major contributor to the southwest TIF area of the county. We'll have built about 400,000 feet here and some space up the street, sending dollars in revenue to other areas of the county that need it. And we're also filling a high demand, high occupancy need in the Manatee market that's supporting employers existing and new to the county, which we're proud of and we think has been very significant. So with that, I want to answer your questions, and I've got my team here to answer your questions and talk about the project more. Thank you.
One of the slides had a polygon, a white polygon. I believe you described that as the wetland boundary. Is that the boundary, the wetland boundary, that slide? Or is that that's actually the project boundary, I see.
That's the project boundary, not the actual wetland boundary. You can see in the picture the planted buffer of the boundary, the stormwater function adjacent to the wetland. The wetland is in here.
Okay, all right. Just wanted to make sure I understood the information. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Any additional questions for the applicant?
I have one.
Mr. Rutledge.
So you say you're going to provide more. How much more? In other words, you're giving back a half acre. How much wetlands are you buying?
We're actually giving back 0.3 UMAMs, not acres. So functional values are a little different depending on what we're impacting here. We're providing, I think, at least 100% equivalency to that. So we're providing 100% more than we need to provide, is what we had discussed with staff. I believe that the recommended stipulation is that we determine that final number and the UMAM, the specific UMAM credits we're purchasing as part of the administrative review, but that was basically our discussion and offer to staff. So 0.6.
So sorry.
No, go ahead.
So we don't know.
No, you do know, sir. I'm saying we have offered 100% more.
Okay.
So 0.6?
Yes.
I did that in my head.
The way that the condition is written, it doesn't specifically state that, so I wanted to be clear, but that is in our record of what we've communicated to the county, and that is what we are ready to provide.
Is the reason that technically the county can only ask for what's required, but you're offering more? Is that the reason that it doesn't say 0.6 in the?
I couldn't tell you. You'll have to ask staff.
We'll address that in the.
Well, Mr. Chair, that's my doing. We don't specify that detail in the ordinance.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Mr. Roth. You had a question?
I need some clarification. Is your intent to vault the current wetland?
The intent is not to vault the current wetland. The stormwater control and the floodplain control that currently provides will be provided in the pond on the south end of the site through a modification of that pond. We have that fully designed. Staff is reviewing.
What will happen to the pond? You're going to cover it or just leave it there?
We're going to excavate and fill that area.
I got it.
Okay. Any additional questions for the applicant? Could you please have your environmental person please come forward, maybe give a explanation of the habit or the health of the wetland? What does it currently consist of? Why is it not a viable wetland?
Sure. For the record, Matthew Miller with WRA, and I've been sworn in.
Thank you.
The history of the site, and we had provided in our packet in the 1950s, it was part of an isolated wetland, and it was ditched with agricultural practices. The hydro period is suppressed, so over time, when you had the railroad come in and then 301, it had a really short hydro period. You had oaks and palms that came in, and it was functioning at that time, but due to disturbance. Part of the Water Management District permit looks at the hydro period of the wetland, and the purpose of attenuation, you provide matching hydrographs to show that your project isn't going to impact. Well, what's happened is that the ditch adjacent to the site isn't being maintained, and so you have a tailwater condition that's raising the stage. And the oaks and the palms they can't tolerate that level of inundation. And what's happened is you've got a transition from a short hydro period wetland to a much longer hydro period. And over time, if maintenance doesn't occur, it will just completely transition to a surface water. Right now, it's losing its quality because of the tailwater condition. But if we went with SwiftMud, one of their recommendations, to memorialize that impact by raising the structure, that would memorialize it, and then it would never be fixed.
Right, so you mentioned oaks and palms, which aren't wetland species. Are you referring to the plantings in the buffers?
No, these are laurel oaks and cabbage palms, which are facultative, so they do meet the definition of a wetland.
Okay.
And so they are hydrophytic. They're just not your long period of inundation like a cypress. But in this case, the wetland over time will continue to transition. You'll have the peak stages increase such that even your forested component that could tolerate a longer inundation wouldn't be viable.
And you mentioned that because maintenance cannot be performed, that it's negatively affecting, it's increasing the stage of the wetland, and that maintenance is off-site. And we talk about tailwater, you're saying that someplace off-site, they're not performing the maintenance, or
that's correct.
Yeah. That's causing water to stand in this wetland and killing wetland species. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
So the ditch has an elevation to where it would naturally flow downstream, and as it's filled up with Brazilian pepper and other things, you've got sedimentation that's occurring that causes that invert elevation to build up. And then as maintenance is deferred and not performed and it's off-site adjacent to the railroad, you have that peak stage increasing, which then actually backs the water into the wetland. So you've got water that may or may not be pre-treated that's going into the wetland or going into the ditch that is now tailwatering into the wetland, which is affecting its quality.
So essentially, just to summarize, the wetland's being flooded out and killing the wetland plants because of the...
Correct.
Okay, all right, thank you. Any additional questions for the applicant? Mr. Rutledge.
So you mentioned the oaks and the palms. What other kind of, wetland species would you see in there that you don't see there now? Like some of the shrubs and some of the smaller plants that you would see that you don't see there?
Based on the condition, when the pre-developed condition, it was a majority of oaks and palms that comprise the wetland. And right now, there's primrose willow and some shrubs that are invasive and cattails, which are indicative of increased nutrient loading, which could be in part due to that water tailwatering in that isn't treated already.
Right.
And so that's what we're finding out there now.
And what about, when you say animals and other species, what other species might you find that you don't find there now?
Let's see.
Do we have any?
Yeah, it's in there. Scrub jay.
When we do our species assessments on sites, the method we use is we identify community types that are on a site, and then we use the Florida Natural Areas Inventory because it will list the species that are commonly found in that community. And so with this site, you have marsh birds and wading birds that would have perched traditionally or even nested in some of the forested components that the forested component is no longer there. Wading birds specifically the depth of water that they feed in is related to their bill length. So once you get wetland that's too deep, all of a sudden it's not really appropriate foraging habitat for them. So when this transitions to the surface water, you would lose that habitat as well.
And doesn't the lack of pretreatment then kind of cause that to be non-friendly environment for a lot of species?
It would. it would create higher nutrients, and you'd have a definite change in vegetative composition and the species you would expect, based on the community type, would no longer use it.
Okay.
Question?
Mr. Roth?
I'm looking at a base map which shows this is 3.7 acres to the boundary. And then in yellow, you have freshwater marsh, 3/4 of an acre, industrial, 2/3 of an acre, and 0.65 of an acre. So that entire area is going to be filled.
That's correct, the wetland area.
Are we going to then cover it with concrete?
Commissioner, the intent is to make this a buildable area, and in exchange for that wetland impact, we are providing the off-site mitigation. Yes, sir.
Where is that off-site mitigation?
It would be purchased from the Braden River Mitigation Bank, which is part of the Lakewood Ranch big slough system that comes through the eastern part of the county. So it's within the watershed boundary of our impacts and in the county.
How do you pay for that?
We purchase it, Commissioner, and then the permit holder of that mitigation bank goes through the effort of maintaining and transferring to operations the wetlands that have been created, and those are perpetual, protected by conservation easement. That is that lasting impact to the benefit of the county.
What kind of money is that?
The 0.6, I'm actually not sure because we haven't purchased it yet, so we have to find out.
Thank you. Thank you. Any additional questions for the applicant before we hear from staff? Okay. All right, thank you. All right. Ms. Rainey. If you could, please make the presentation for staff.
Okay. Dorothy Rainey for staff, and I have been sworn. The item before you is PDI 1733-P, SRQ Tech Park expansion. This is an aerial of the site, and this is the future land use category, which is IL, Industrial Light. The zoning is PDI for the entire site. And the project details are that it is a preliminary site plan approval request for adding approximately 54,529 square feet of additional industrial / warehouse use to add it to the previously approved 358,472 for a grand total of 418,748 square feet. Here's I tried to just crop the little area that reflects the existing conditions where the wetland is. You can sort of see that it's a little bit faint, but the wetland area and then the proposed improvements that will go within that project area is on the right. This is a photo of the on-site wetland, and I believe that's looking eastward. And you can see some of the remaining vegetation there pretty well, but the applicant's environmental person did describe what's left there. The project details, again, the total site is 26.97 acres. The floor area ratio that's proposed with the addition of the additional square footage is 0.36, so it is required to obtain special approval as it's exceeding the 0.35. The open space provided is 6.15 acres, reducing it from 25% to 23%. It's approximately 0.59 acres reduction, and a specific approval is required to approve that. It's in flood zone X. Access points are one off of Talavas Road and one off 301. And there's some, this was from a previous, the previous approval, just the photos were available, so I left them in there. And then this is the existing buffer along 301. Existing access to Talavas, and then the business to the east. The loading bays on the existing buildings, there's photos of that. The specific approval item, as I mentioned before, is to reduce the open space from 25% to 23%, and we recommend approval. And then the special approval is to request a reduction in the open space from 25% to 23%, and we recommend approval of that. I'm sorry, the previous That was FAR, the special approval. Positive aspects, there is centralized water and sewer available, which the rest of the development's already utilizing, and the project is in an established manufacturing complex. Negative aspects is the applicant proposes to construct the new building in an area designated as wetland with a conservation easement. Mitigating measures are that the request to release the conservation easement is being processed concurrent with the preliminary site plan application, and it's going through the property management department. And if the request is approved, the existing conservation easement will be eliminated. And staff recommends approval, and that's it.
Ms. Rainey, can you go back to the photograph of the wetland?
Wetland?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. Now, how do I do that?
Maybe.
Thank you. It's autopilot. Thanks. There we go.
Okay, thank you. And just for clarification, we see some of the palms in the background and the wetland species that they look rather brown. Are these plants that were planted by the applicant?
Yeah, I'm not sure. Mr. Knable will probably be able to answer that.
Yes, sir.
Is it on? Robert Knable, and I have been sworn.
Thank you.
I would have to defer to the applicant
Okay.
on that as far as if those have been planted or not.
Okay, all right, we'll follow up and with that. It's just, I do see a palm with a canopy missing, several of them, 3 in a row, and they're also standing in water, so I thought maybe that might have been what was referred to previously as not being viable for planting, so, okay, thank you. All right, Ms. Rainey, I'm sorry, were you done with your?
I'm done, yeah.
Okay.
Any questions?
Questions for
It's-
for staff?
Could I ask?
Mr.
I just want to add one thing.
Yes, ma'am.
Kind of as a follow-up to the comprehensive plan amendments that we've just recently done.
Mhm.
The special approval where they're having to ask special approval to increase the floor area ratio from 0.35. 0.75 is what is allowed in the industrial light. When that is adopted, what y'all just recommended approval to the board of, and they've transmitted it to the state, that happened Thursday, there would no longer be a special approval required in the future. That's just one of those examples of the special approvals that will be eliminated because the comprehensive plan allows up to a 0.75 FAR.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Mr. Roth.
Property that abuts this. Do we know who owns that property?
Which side?
It's on the right side, right here.
That's the existing facility, is it not? Ms. Rainey?
I'm sorry.
In the photograph,
Oh, in the photo?
there's a building
I-
that's shown there. Is that the existing facility?
Yeah, that's immediately to the south of the, of the wetland. Yeah, because this is looking eastward.
So that's on site?
Yeah.
On site.
Mhm.
Mr. Rutledge, did you have a question?
Yeah, so is there a vehicle when a group like this, and I'm pretty familiar with the mitigation purchases and so forth, when they ask for a reduction in green space from 25 to 23, is there a similar process that we request them to execute for that?
Mr. Chair, I can answer the question. No.
Ma'am. Well, it is.
That I understand. No.
Isn't it? It's open space that's being provided, correct? Not green space. So.
Well, it's the superior design. The criteria for specific approval is you're proposing an alternative design.
Yeah.
So they have to be doing something on site that.
So it would be inappropriate then for me to think that in buying the mitigation space, they would include some significant consideration for the change in green space. That's not.
No, we can't require it.
Right.
And it's open space, not necessarily green space. It could be pond. Pond counts as open space. So.
I was kind of a generic term.
All right. Any additional questions for staff? I have one, Mr. Knable. Can you please speak to the public benefit component of the application?
Right. So the applicant, the code has, the land development code has that where the applicant may receive approval to impact a wetland if it meets any of the overriding public benefits. So one of them is providing wetland mitigation and also demonstrating one or more of the following. So under 706.5C1, impacts the wetlands, it says it's allowed approval if the applicant shows that their action will result in a net environmental gain. So, like the applicant had said, the SwiftMud UMAM scores requiring 0.3, they're going to propose 0.6, which is double that amount. So that's a net gain. And then under 0.706.5C3, if not impacted, the wetland would not survive as a functioning wetland. They've provided information showing that functions are deteriorating out there. SwiftMud has concurred with their analysis, and therefore the applicant's providing the mitigation offsite to. And in the state of Florida, they look at functions, not actual acreage, so they're meeting the intent of no net loss of functions.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Nabel, have you been on site to view this wetland?
Yes, I have been on site with myself and Gary Race, who's another environmental planner.
And you agree that it's not a viable system, that the function is degraded?
I think right now, where it sits right now, it's deteriorating. Whether somebody, given an amount of money or something like that, you may or may not. I mean, there is an issue with the drainage, as far as there's a drainage ditch along the railroad track that is sedimentations come in there, so it's not. It drains probably during the high water flows, but not during the lower water flows. Is what it appeared to. That's not based on. That's based on just visual. No monitoring with gauges or anything like that.
And then in the package that we received, there were photographs from, I think, 1957 was one of them I saw that predated the construction of 301. Did the construction of the 301 have a negative impact on this wetland?
Let me look at the pictures, but there were some other wetlands. What is it? West of there that more than likely were cut off by the construction of the road. There's other issues with probably the railroad had been there for a long time, but the railroad obviously had an impact on the drainage out there. So.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Any additional questions for staff?
Could I ask a question of the applicant?
We'll get to that.
Okay.
So if there's nothing for staff, we're going to go ahead and go to the public comment portion of the hearing.
Can I ask one other question, Mr.? No?
Sure. Yeah.
So generally, where you have these kind of small wetlands that are less effective, the gauge of how, and you can replace those into these banks where they're protected, they put an easement, and they're protected from there on out. Is that a good solution? I mean, is that, as opposed to trying to save this, in other words, it's all about economics, right? So you can spend a lot of money, you probably could bring this wetlands back somehow. Probably, maybe.
Probably, yeah.
It's possible. Enough money, you can do a lot of things, right? But the solution of putting that with a bigger wetlands that's not cut off and doesn't have these other problems as part of a hydraulic and environmental study is probably better to consolidate those, keep them together, and have them work in unison, right? As opposed to these one-off.
Yes, I would say yes and no. I mean, like, the benefits to this is that with the wetland mitigation banks that they do in Florida and around the U.S., they're in perpetuity. You have a larger area. There is research, that shows that smaller wetlands do provide beneficial functions in the landscape, especially with birds and other type amphibians and things like that, that they're important. But with this one, I mean, it's specific to this. I mean, I want to make clear it's not changing any kind of policy here. It's just specific to this site. This wetlands has issues. It's hard. Probably it's not going to, like you said, you know, with the amount of money and everything else, I mean, it's not going to survive probably, and the situation is going to continue to deteriorate at that site. So in this specific case, I think probably moving it to the functions
To the bank.
to a bank.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right, we're going to go ahead and go to the public comment portion of the hearing. I don't have any speaker cards, but if there's anybody who wishes to come forward and speak on this matter, please do so now. Anyone at all? Okay, seeing no one come forward, we're going to close the public comment portion of the hearing and I guess go to, there was another question for the applicant. I think, Mr. Rutledge, you wanted to ask, so we'll go ahead and ask that, and then we'll get staff closing comments and then allow for the rebuttal, so.
So, Todd, I think this is what should be done. Like, my opinion is this, you've done a good research. I think there's an argument. I've had to maintain some wetlands that just were constant expenses. And I just think that's a bad model, in my opinion. I think that where we can capture this and put density where we want density, it's the right thing to do. You've got all the benefits of access points. This piece going into service as a development makes tons of sense. I would like to say that I think, the Benderson Development Group is well-respected. They do a lot of good things in the community, and I think they're one of the better developers. And so I would just ask you whether you thought it wouldn't be great to go in front of the commission and say, you talked to us, and we like this, we recommend this, and you thought about it in reflection that maybe it should be 200%. And so that's what I'd like to propose as a question for you. Do you think that this particular project with that opportunity economically could support 200% in the mitigation? Not because it's a lot, but because when you give the benefit of these other things, you get this, and the community looks at it, and we say, oh, we're always voting for developers. And I've already kind of said that I think you guys are good guys. I just always like to think that maybe they went above and beyond. We called you to say, hey, do your very best for us in the community. Do the very best for our wetlands, our birds, and all these. And can you do that for us? And I wondered if that would be something you would think about and go back and talk to your team. So when you go to the commission, not to me, that would be something you could say. I wondered if that was interesting to you at all.
So Commissioner, it's a interesting question. And,
well, thank you for that.
I'll tell you that this has not been a project that, in terms of the development side of it, that is something we get out of bed in the morning and are real excited about, because we're building 54,000 square feet of warehouse space, and we've spent a whole lot on this failed problem. And we're going to spend millions of dollars on site construction here for 54,000 square feet of warehouse. It's the right place. This wetland probably, if we had initially designed this project, we wouldn't have worked around it. We would have hit it the first time, but the road was in place, the infrastructure was in place, and we picked up a failed project. Can we do that? Yes, we can. We're members of the community. We're always here to contribute. We maintain some really vibrant, large wetland ecosystems behind as part of the Cooper Creek DRI, and those are beautiful places if you ever get back there. This is not one of those. And so can we do it? Commissioner, we can, but I'll tell you that in terms of our initial offer, the 100% more, it came at some resistance from me, because I really felt that we had reached a point with Swiftmud in the county, and we were working together, and we intended to fix the problem. So we spent the money to fix that wetland, and then we couldn't find anyone with any control over fixing that downstream problem. So can we do it? We can. Will we do it? If you all would like us to do it, we'll do it. But we are already bleeding on this particular project. It's not the end of the world. We're happy to do it if it's right for the community and right in your perspective. But I just want you to know that this has been an arduous process and a rough one for us.
And I appreciate your answer. I'm not trying to strong arm you. I'm just saying that one of the challenges sitting up here is it always seems like we hear people say, "Oh, you're not doing this for the developer." I respect you guys. I think what you've done there. I know the previous project. I know how long it sat there. I think you brought us taxes, which you go to other places. I'm saying all that good. It's just when I look at this and say, "Okay, we're getting this and this and this." could it, and 100% sounds great, but when I see the size of the piece you're going to use and what you're going to, I just ask you what you guys think about it. That's all. I'm not, if
Yeah,
you say
no,
no,
my-
I'm going to,
my answer is-
I'm telling you, I'm going to
yeah.
vote for you.
My answer is yes. I just wanted you to know, because I know I went through it in the presentation. We've been at this, and it hurt. But yeah, we can do that.
All right.
Thank you. Anything else for the applicant? Okay. All right, we'll go to staff closing comments. Thank you, Mr. Mathis.
Thank you.
We did. No closing comments? Are there any points of rebuttal? All right, so we're going to close the public hearing and open it up for deliberation. This is something that I see frequently. You drive around and you see fragmented wetlands, things that get protected, and you have to wonder how viable are they, and this is a classic case. I think this problem began prior to 1957. If you look at the old aerials, you can see ditches cut, and I know who cut those ditches. It was the ag guy who was trying to dry the land up so he could use it. But so it's been an incremental increase of impact over the wetland. I think this is one of the a good example of a system that probably does not function, never would function as intended, and it's just going to be a continual effort on their part. And I think this would be an appropriate one that would again aggregate wetland into a larger group. So, and then the other component is the floor area ratio. We're along 301. Yeah. A corridor, an industrial corridor, I think it's appropriate to try to maximize the land within that area. So I think this is one that I'll support. I'd be interested to hear any additional comments if anybody had any different opinions or any additional things that are maybe of interest.
But I'd just like to say that I think that the intensity approach is important to us, because once you get that traffic in there, and once you have those curb cuts, and once you have that traffic alternative off 301, the more intensity you can do there, the better. I think that's just good planning, and I think that your approach to doing this is important. And I've had a million of these wetlands where we build these big boxes around oak trees, hoping they'll stay and all that, and it's kind of a declining benefit. But and look, you guys do nice work. I mean, the developer's known for a product that's well respected in the community, so I appreciate that, and I appreciate the opportunity of really talking it through. I feel like that we can talk to you like this, and I think that's valuable. I mean, I think that's what our purpose is up here, and I appreciate the opportunity. So
thank you,
Mr. Chair.
Yes,
I just want to say for the record, well, I appreciate Mr. Relich's questions, that we have to be careful with this nebulous phrase, overriding public benefit.
Yes,
It's
ma'am.
one of the code sections we have to amend in the future as well, to give more objective standards of what we mean by that.
Mm-hmm.
We have to avoid appearing to negotiate increased exactions on the record. I'm just saying, because the courts say you can't do that, so.
That's why I wouldn't. I want to go to court.
Okay, so I'm just clarifying that for record, since you brought it up.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. So
You didn't feel extracted, did you? Or exacted? Or?
Exactly.
extracted, exacted. We'll get you at the source, Mr. Rutledge. Any additional questions, comments, concerns? Okay. Chair will entertain a motion.
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Leslie.
I move recommendation of the revised updated memo.
Okay. As clarified by Ms. Schenk previously. Thank you. We have a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Mr. Rhodes, second. Is there any additional discussion? Okay, seeing none, the chair will call the matter to vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Chair votes aye. Motion passes 6-0. And I believe that's the final thing we have on our agenda, so I'm going to call the meeting to adjourn. Thank you.